Yes, so we are a member of the World Green Building Council, which is a global movement for green buildings across the world, and close to 70 plus green building councils form part of the World Green Building Council. We are pleased to have you all join us today for this webinar on flood risks mitigation, measures in Mauritius. And we are also pleased to have our panelists with us today to provide us on insights on on this very important topic. As we all know, back in 2013, there were 11 people who died in a flash flood in Port Louis, and recently there has been heavy rainfall in the south in Plaisance on the 16th of April. So we have today with us Tony Luen. He's a founding board member of the GBCM. Mr. Aneerood Sookhareea, Superintendent of Police at the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Center. Mr. Vincent Florens, he's a PhD, Associate Professor of Ecology, Department of Biosciences and Ocean Studies at the University of Mauritius. Mr. Jogeeswar, Seewoobaduth, the Acting Director of Environment and Ministry of Environment, Solid Waste Management and Climate Change. Thank you to all of you for joining us. I know you have busy schedules, so we really appreciate this time you've taken out to be with us today. Okay, so I'll just quickly let you know the format of the webinar and then we'll proceed. So the format will be that we have 5 key questions, and we will this will be addressed to the panelists, and then we will have a Q&A at the end of the 5 questions, if that's all right. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and yeah, any comments or questions that you have. Good. So should we start? Okay, so we have the first question. So our first question is, why flooding has become an issue of increasing concern in Mauritius over the last few years? I'm going to ask Mr. Vincent and Mr. Sookhareea to reply on this question, please. Go ahead.
Okay, should I go first?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I've articulated my answer for that in 5 different sub parts. And I think one thing which is very important to perhaps talk about, which is often overlooked, is a question of perception. Flooding is reported where there are people, and indeed people there are in Mauritius. I mean, if we think about the world population, we are already considered to be overpopulated, but Mauritian population density is 13 times above that. So we have a lot of pairs of eyes to see the flooding and to feel it as well. On top of that, we have nowadays, in the last 10 or 15 years or more or so, we have social media, ubiquitous, instantaneous. We record these floodings, we share it more. So there is a lot of that happening as well, which we should keep in mind, because in all objectivity, this must be said. But beyond that, of course, there is an increase in flooding incidents. And some of these aspects, of course, are pretty exacerbated in Mauritius. I mean, Mauritius is one of the most deforested places that you can find in the world. We were one of the last places to be colonized by humans, and we became one of the most impacted, like destroyed. We have less than 4%, or about 4% of our natural habitat left. And we know that land use changes, like changing from a natural environment into anything else, will greatly increase flooding risks. I mean, a study in Madagascar is going to come out in July, just showed if in forests very similar to Mauritian forest, they studied intact forest compared to degraded forest. We're talking about forest versus forest. And we have 11 times more overland water flow in a degraded forest. Just imagine, now if you change that degraded forest into a parking lot, you have so much more water. So deforestation is a major driver of flooding, and Mauritius is one of the worst countries in the world for that. So we need to really restore forests. We need to repair things, and we need to stop deforesting. The other point, third point, is extreme built-up hard surface cover that we have in Mauritius. If you look at the average worldwide, it's about 0.5% or so, more or less, an average for countries. Of course, there's a big variation, but on average, it's about 0.5% of countries' surface area are covered in hard surfaces like asphalt, cement, concrete, etc. Mauritius, we're close to 10%. That is, we're 20 times, about 20 times more than that. Of course, hard surfaces would not absorb water, which is displaced, the rain will go somewhere else. And we are building new houses, new areas. We have this middle class expansion in Mauritius that we are having now more and more places being built up, including places which are prone to flooding. So these are very important points. Now, the other point that we hear a lot about, which is true, is climate change. But it's only exacerbating the problems that we are having, because the more important problems are already created. As I said earlier, the deforestation, the very high level of hard surfaces. And climate change has three main components. First, there is a reduced rainfall over Mauritius. We've lost about 100 millimeters of rain on average over the last 50 years or so. So we have a trend which is going towards less flooding because of this reduced rainfall. However, at the same time, we have a second effect, which is the uplands of Mauritius are getting less and less wet, and the lowlands are getting less and less dry. These are also another trend, more regional. And a third trend, of course, is the extreme events. We're having more intense and more frequent extreme events, and they're more and more unpredictable as well. Hard to predict. When they come, it's kind of too late. So hence we need to plan well in advance. Now, this situation is not very good, and actually it's made worse by what can be additive between these components, because as I said, we are in the world, we are towards the highest in the wrong things. So we are most vulnerable to these situations. So we need to act even more vigorously against this kind of root causes that we talk about. And also there are feedback loops. I'll give you one example. If you have, for example, flooding and soil erosion, flooding will also create soil erosion. You have less soil. When you have less soil, the soil is less able to retain water, is less able to sustain vegetation. So next time you have the same amount of rainfall falling there, you have increased flooding. So all this together makes for a quite big picture, but it's a very challenging one for us to act on. I think I reached 5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you for staying in your time. Mr. Sookhareea, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Joya, and also Professor Florens, which you have been addressing the issue why flooding has become an issue. I will, at the level of the center, we will have a more structured discussion on the issue of flooding. Why it has become of concern to us now. First of all, flooding, the term in itself sometimes is wrongly interpreted, because why I am mentioning that is because flooding is one thing, water accumulation is another, flash flooding is another very pertinent issue to us. So I will leave these three issues, water accumulation, flooding, and flash flooding, for the members here to ponder upon that. So let's come back to the question why it has become a subject of concern. First of all, flooding, including flash flood especially, is causing death. Mauritian nationals are losing their life. The event of 2013, it's what flash flood can do in urban areas, in cities. This is one. Second, flooding is increasingly affecting the population in various ways. We have also the economic loss. Flooding is causing economic loss in various aspects. And fourthly, flooding, flash flood and water accumulation is causing damage to critical infrastructure and causing disruption at different levels. Just to mention the recent heavy rainfall event we had as from the 16th April of this year. Early warning forecasting is another issue for rainfall, heavy rainfall. If we go into it, it will take a lot to speak upon that. Coming back to the recent heavy rainfall event, you have seen that it has been the first time that Mauritius has conducted SC and HSC exam in the cyclonic and rainy season. And what has happened is that during the holding of the exams, there has been a heavy rainfall episode. So you can imagine how it has disrupted our educational system here, which is considered as a critical service. Over and above that, flooding has happened in a COVID pandemic situation, where now to manage these situations has become very, very complex. And taking all these into consideration, why flooding has become of concern is that for all these institutions like ours, the government has a responsibility to ensure the safety of the public. So all these things relating to flooding is making this situation even more of concern. And I know five minutes won't be able to cover most of the point, but just to tell you that based upon the last rainy event, there has been quite une prise de conscience maintenant at the highest level. There has been people residing in flood-prone areas, in landslide-prone areas, where during heavy rainfall warning, the authorities has to ensure their safety. And it's not an easy task. But nevertheless, we have been able through evacuation. You can't do much in flooding situation. Can't do much. The only thing that you can do to ensure that people's lives are safeguarded is through evacuation. And now just to mention that evacuation is not in the culture in Mauritius. When you ask someone to evacuate, so they don't realize the risk of what is going on. Like Dr. Florens has mentioned, the impact of climate change, the intensity of rainfall. Short period, we are having very, very heavy downpour. And just to make you all realize the event of the le 28 avril, 28 April, the heavy rainfall in the south. I am referring to Vieux Grand Port, Rivière des Créoles. The flow was of such intensity that, you know, the blinded, the armored vehicles of the army was even being pushed by these heavy downpour along. Just to tell you how the situation is now. So it's encouraging that NGOs like yours are showing concern, and we have at the level of the center, we are mandated to give support to NGOs, so that through NGOs also is another channel for us to reach the other segment of the population, so that they realize the importance of flooding and its impact. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Sookhareea. You raised some very interesting points. So hopefully we can discuss about that later as we have the questions at the later stage. So my next question is again to Mr. Vincent. What are the consequences of such flooding on society and the environment? What do you think is the what are the consequences?
Sorry, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, can you please come again?
Yes, sure. So what are the consequences? Yeah, what are the consequences of such flooding on society and the environment?
Okay, thanks. I just put my alarm again. Am I stopwatch. Yeah, I mean, some of the, Mr. Sookhareea already mentioned some of the consequences in society, but about loss of lives, damage to property, goods, activities, you know, damaged fields, damaged agricultural production, etc. But one thing, and of course, you need to have cost of repairs, cost of protection, cost of maintenance, and many things like that, and all the planning that is that needs to be done in order to avert future such situations. So all these costs. But I like to think about society and environment as one entity. I would not separate them, because basically society is embedded in the environment. It very much depends on it, and there's a lot of flowing back and forth between society and environment, and there are feedback loops, etc. So I would say, of course, when you talk about flooding, we've seen already, I won't repeat what Mr. Sookhareea has said. We have all that very obvious, emotionally very strong impacts that are really marking the minds and stuff. But it is also important to realize that these floodings are having a lot of much more insidious harm to the environment, which collectively can cause actually much more harm than what emotionally we get carried over. We see these very strong images, we get very concerned with this, but there's so much more happening, more insidiously, more out of our sight. And that is what I want to actually perhaps put emphasis on. Of course, a very simple thing. I mean, when you have more water flowing over land, it has more energy. Of course, it carries more load, that is mud. So simply put, you'll have much more siltation of water bodies, rivers, but principally lagoons. And Mauritius depends so much on lagoons. We don't want our lagoons to get silted up with mud, because that has very severe consequences for the life there, and also for all the livelihoods associated with these lagoons. And because the siltation will smother corals, will kill the corals, because corals need clear water to actually function optimally. And we have to realize that corals are already under a lot of global, regional, and other local stresses. For example, climate change, rising sea level, rising acidification, acidification of the ocean, deoxygenation of the oceans, warming, coral bleaching, diseases, and many other things. So we have a lot of stresses on lagoons and corals there, and we need to reduce further stresses like siltation. Another big problem that these floodings will actually bring will be carrying pollutants to the lagoons, pesticides and other pollutants coming from human activities inland. They are carried to the lagoons. And I would say that it is important to realize that when you carry pollutants very fast to the lagoons, it's actually much different from actually non-flooding situation where the pollutants can get carried little by little, slowly in a natural manner, and they get degraded before they reach the lagoons. But now, no, when we just have a flooding, there's a fast movement of water into the lagoon, carrying the pollutants, literally intact and very potent to kill. I'm talking about pesticides in the fields, etc., but also other pollutants, persistent pollutants from all kinds of human activities. So this gets washed up. And this is why also canalizing water, it might be a good fix in a place where it's been flooded, but it's also displacing the problem because it's causing problems in the lagoons by inflow of pollutants rapidly. And the other point as well, of course, is a rapid movement of fertilizers. I mean, when you have a lot of rain, you have a lot of water mobilizing like this, they will carry the fertilizers from the fields, which is, Mauritius is very large agricultural, as you know, and these fertilizers will go into the field and from the fields into the water, into the washed into the water bodies, into the lagoons, and there it will create what we call algal blooms. That is, it will, when you have algae proliferating, you have more turbid water, you have corals being covered with algal growth, and algal growth blocks the sunlight. Coral needs sunlight to survive, so the coral will weaken and even die. Remember, they're already stressed by other factors as well. So now we're adding these new stresses, like the straw that breaks the camel's back. So it's additional on that, and we are degrading our lagoons in that way. We kill many of these corals, and it takes a long, and of course, when you have, it's a domino effect after that, you have a lot of problems about fisheries, about livelihoods, etc. And of course, more on land, you will have loss of soil fertility, because when you have erosion, you have less soil. When you have less soil, you have less arable land as well. And nowadays we are in a situation of food scarcity, increasing food scarcity. We need our arable soil. We don't need it in killing our corals in the lagoons. There are other problems. You have a reduced groundwater recharge, because when you have rapid flow of water over the land, that's in floodings, you have a saturation of the ground. They can't absorb the water, and then basically you have a lot of this water goes over land and do not replenish the groundwater so well. So later on, what you have droughts. They are this is the sister of the flooding. So you have flooding in one season and drought in the other. They are actually two sides of the same coin, because during this flooding, you didn't have much replenishment of the groundwater reserves, so you have droughts. And now droughts, they have positive feedbacks, of course. Drought promotes further land degradation, which makes further weakening the ability of the land to do all the ecosystem services that is good for us, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, replenishment of more water, etc. It can even be a hazard in terms of fires, for example. We know around Poli Mountain, we have a lot of fires going there, and it's largely because of the very dried environment, very degraded forests around there. So basically, it harms society directly through the loss of lives, loss of property, etc., and indirectly because all these environmental services are damaged as well. So there's a kind of feedback between these two: degrading soil, degrading water budget, degrading biodiversity, degrading fisheries, degrading livelihoods. So it's really far ranging. And the last thing I'd like to say quickly, is that basically very much the same root causes that causes flooding excesses, etc., are resulting in biodiversity loss and environmental degradation loss. It's the same root causes, very similar. So basically what we can do, we can look at biodiversity, the state of biodiversity in Mauritius, as a measure of how well we are properly managing floods. If our biodiversity is doing well, we're doing well. If our biodiversity is doing poorly, we're doing poorly. Unfortunately, our biodiversity is doing very poorly. We are actually most of our species are declining nowadays, and we have the rarest species in the world. We have the symbol of extinction. So basically, biodiversity is telling us as a kind of red alarm, or an alarm bell, that we are doing bad. We really need to turn it around and make much better situation. And I think the solutions are there. We just need to realize that we have to use nature to help us rather than fight nature. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. That was really good. We just think about flooding at the immediate, what's happening at that location, but this is, it's interesting to know that it actually creates stress on our oceans and our marine life as well. So thank you for that. That's a great insight. I'll just carry on to my next question here. This question is for Mr. Seewoobaduth and Mr. Sookhareea. What are the solutions put forward by the government to mitigate flood risks? Now, Mr. Seewoobaduth, you can talk about at the national level, and then Mr. Sookhareea at the infrastructural level. So you both have 7 minutes, so that's quite some time. So I'll let you, Mr. Seewoobaduth, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Joya, for this sharing. Greetings, everyone, and again, good afternoon for those who join a bit later. I'm happy to be invited, and I'm really honored to be invited to talk to on this subject. It happened that I was for some time, I was also the officer in charge of the Land Drainage Authority. So I'm currently also the officer in charge of the Climate Change Division. So maybe I'm a bit privileged to tell you about, what are the measures that government is, to continue to mitigate the flood risk. Now, first and foremost, it's not only one government work.
We have to acknowledge that it has been happening over the years. But just to speak, I mean, not to take too far back, I must say that, you know, measures have been taken on various fronts. In terms of early warning system, in terms of setting up of institution, in terms of legislative measures, in terms of infrastructural measures, in terms of, you know, sensitization, awareness raising, in terms of, you know, waste management. All these measures, at the end of the day, each one, I mean, at some point in time, they are related to the issue of flood accumulation, flood water or water accumulation. I mean, we're talking of the root causes actually that address the issue of flooding and the risk mitigation. Now, to start with, we must recall that, you know, unfortunately, we had two occasions where there were deaths, you know, one in 2008 and then in 2013. Now, post that, we must admit that, you know, there has been an improvement in the early warning system with the Doppler radar. It came with the assistance from the Japanese government, and today we have a Doppler radar, and at least we are having better, more kind of refined, I would say, forecasting as compared to years, you know, ago. And I can say at least from there, there has been this improvement, which is there. And it's a fact. Once you have a very good early warning system or a good early warning system, people are alerted well in advance. At least, first thing first, life are saved, you know, life are saved. And we are not having, God forbid, we're not having now, you know, that the casualties like we had in 2013 and 2008. This is first thing first. Second thing is, I believe, and I thank I seize this opportunity to also thank the disaster team. You know, they have been doing wonderful job. Now we have a National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Center. Before that, the coordination was disjointed in a way, but now we have a more structured coordination and a more kind of, even the involvement in facilitating students going for SC exam. That was quite, you know, relieving to note, you know, that they are at that level really mobilized in the field to mitigate the risk, you know, and even when there were the other kind of risk of landslide or related to that. Now, coming to the other more important things is that, you know, government also came up with what is called the a land drainage authority, okay, land drainage act, and of course with the land drainage authority established, and a land drainage master plan which is under formulation. Now we all know that, you know, over the years, the geography, there have been modification happening. Vincent told it about the change in land use. We are losing all those drains that were there for long times, the waterways, most of them are gone. Even in the agricultural field, they have gone. And this is why, you know, the government decided to come up with a land drainage master plan, at least to reassess, to make actual assessment in terms of, you know, what would be the actual impact, in fact, in the context of climate change, and also taking, you know, historical flood-prone areas, mapping them, reinventoring those canals and drains, remodeling, you know, the hydrologic modeling, etc., etc. Land drainage master. This one is really very important because it is going to help us understand where actually you can contain the water in terms of retention basin, where you need to have improvement at the exit points, what are the kind of drains at the end of the day which should be specific for a specific region based on the water catchment areas. I think this is a wonderful kind of approach that government is taking, at least to come up to know and understand, but there's still room for improvement there. Now, third one, I must say, government, you know, when they have revamped the National Environment Fund, over the last 4 or 5 years, already government has invested something like 4 billion rupees, which a good percent of it, 20 to 25% going in terms of land drainage management. So I leave it to Mr. Sookhareea to talk on the infrastructure for the drain, but at least just to remember that over the years, I say, let's say over the first of cut-off drain being constructed, area position now. Example, in the Amuri area, in the Port Vise area, after 2013, I've hardly heard any kind of, inundation happening or flash flood or water accumulation in those areas where we have been having those drains, cut-off drains, which have been constructed towards that area. Now, one thing to remind also is that with the National Environment Fund, facilities, funding are being provided for the even purchase of vehicles. Since waste is one of the issue causes of blocking drain. So those local authorities are also being provided with facilities for purchase of equipment to address flooding issues, for cleaning, maintenance of drains, to have a proper maintenance program, as well as to have bulky waste campaign and so on and so forth at the end of the day, but also to look also at other aspects of landslide which infrastructure will capture. Fourth one, I believe, is there is something which is very important. All the waters, most of the waters in Mauritius are evacuated through rivers and water courses. Government has also given us funding to make an audit of those rivers which have with time, like Vincent was saying, getting silted. Some of the rivers are overflowing at certain specific location. So there is a study which is on, which has been, which is now nearing finalization. It could be by next month or so, under the aegis of the Ministry of Environment, where some 60+ rivers have been assessed, and where we are going to identify which are those measures that need to be taken in terms of maintenance, desilting, and so on and so forth. So I know I'm already 7 minutes, but I'll just speak very quickly to one I've also identified as other measures. Now, most important also among the important things is land drainage impact assessment. All major developments are required to have land drainage impact assessment, taking the catchment, taking a plan, taking the surface area where development will happen, and what it is going to be at the downstream part of it. So I'm not going to go deep into that. This is a requirement. And most important also the Climate Change Act. With the Climate Change Act last year, and which came into force as from the 22nd of April, there will be a Department of Climate Change, and in the law there is a requirement for adaptation. And as part of adaptation, we are advocating nature-based solution. We want to have this nature-based solution adaptation happening. There is also, in terms of carbon sequestration, greening of Mauritius, planting trees, using the nature-based solution approach to remake the ecosystem work in the coastal zone. We are also kind of setting up an artificial reef where we can replanting of mangrove, lots of things happening there. And in fact, this is going to be in function with the vulnerability assessment. We have also the mainstreaming of climate change in building and land use permit. At some point in time, following the assessment we did in the past project, and you were also there at some point in time at the ministry, Joya. So we are also doing some exercise with regarding to mainstreaming climate change in building and land use permit. And very briefly on that, government has set up a technical committee at this point in time to work on what is called a green permitting system. Promotion for rainwater harvesting should become part and parcel, which I'll speak a bit later on that also. So most of the district council, they are also working on those to at least mainstreaming those component of climate change. Not to forget, we have the issue of circular economy, collection of bulky waste, which is happening in all those authorities, twice or thrice a year. And eventually we also have what is called the déchetterie. So recycling will be part of it. Those bulky waste, instead of finding themselves in the drain or in the rivers, now luckily we have somewhere where we can send them, right? There is also, soon will be the announcement, we are going to amend, government is amending these offenses for littering and dumping. Actually, these will change from 10,000 will become 25,000 rupees. So quite some big changes happening, and it will be announced very soon. And of course, there are a series of other measures which are there. I won't have time. Of course, time is not on my side. In terms of awareness raising, greening program, which is coming. I know the list is long, but
Yes. No, thank you so much, Mr. Seewoobaduth. I'll just have to say that, wow, you know, a lot is being done, and it's wonderful to hear all these programs, especially the nature-based solutions. That's wonderful. I have some questions, but I'll wait till the end. I'll quickly go to my next question. I know we're already at 12:45 here. What are the green building solutions to flooding? This is to Tony. Tony, you have 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Less now, 5.
Yeah, I think we need to give a word to greetings, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Mr. Sookhareea, maybe you wanted to talk about the infrastructural projects of government before I carry on?
Yeah. So this is what I wanted.
So sorry about that. Yes, of course.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Seewoobaduth. He has mentioned quite a number of initiatives. We have been working together for a long time since the setting up of this center. He knows all the ins and outs. We have been looking into all these aspects. Though he has mentioned most of the points, but let me flag a few more. So, you know, the government, the government has put a lot into place in terms of governance, legal and institutional mechanism in place. It's well established now to deal with disasters, including flooding. We all these are inspired with international frameworks like the forest. It is a Sendai framework for disasters reduction, and maybe Mr. Seewoobaduth has not thought it wise to mention it because it's an exhaustive list in order. But for us, on a disaster risk reduction perspective, the Sendai framework is like the Bible for us. And most of the governance, legal, and institutional mechanism in place are inspired by the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. In terms of strengthening measures, we have put into place the National Environment Fund, which the Director of Environment has mentioned. Now the government is investing heavily. All these are open source information. If you go on our website, you just look for the National Environment Fund. Each year, you will see government is investing billions in disaster risk reduction, and it has a specific component on flood management. Authorities at national level as well as at the local level now are being given the necessary financial means as long as it is permissible to deal with the problem of flooding. We have now a minister responsible for disaster risk reduction. I repeat it, we have a minister, a VPM, Vice Prime Minister, now responsible for disaster risk reduction. Just to tell you the importance the state is giving at governance level to deal with the problem of flooding. Now we have a ministry. I've spoken on minister, and a ministry also is responsible for disaster risk reduction. We have the Ministry of Local Government and Disaster Risk Reduction. Initially, we were under the Ministry of Environment, where for obvious reason, now it is under the Ministry of Local Government for dealing with disaster risk management. We have a council, so the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, as per the NDRM Act. The council is headed by the VPM, the minister responsible for disaster management, and policy decisions are taken. They are especially for flooding. We have a center where I am presently posted since 2013. The center has been put into place. We have a land drainage authority, which the Director of Environment has mentioned. We have a national disaster scheme, where who should do what before, during, and after flooding. It's clearly laid down. We have our Act 2016, National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act. And also there has quite been a number of other measures. The Doppler radar is another very quantum leap we are doing in terms of early work. So just to summarize at infrastructure level, what we are doing, we have dedicated drainage works, drainage project. We have the local, they are the one implementing drain projects at local level. We have the road development authority, which implement drains works specifically for all our road network, the classified roads. And we have also recently developed our policy strategic framework and action plan, and the National Disaster Risk Reduction Policy Strategic Framework and Action Plan, which will chart the way of our country in the next 10 years. What we have to do to strengthen disaster risk reduction, including flooding. So that's a bit very quickly. We have flagged, share with you what, in fact, not this center is doing, but what the state, the Republic of Mauritius is doing. And we should not forget Rodrigues, Agalega, and Sinmanun. They are also part and parcel of the Republic of Mauritius, and they also, in certain, for example, Rodrigues, in a number of instances, they have been affected by flooding due to climate change. The intensity of rainfall in a very short lapse of time has changed now. And to conclude, I will tell you, in fact, we wanted LDA also to be present. So, you know, with all these heavy downpour, it has put into question so many of our approach, the principle that we are adopting. In fact, to capture all that rain, which has, for example, at Plaisance, 400 millimeter of rainfall in less than 3 hours. So you can't have rains to manage such type of. So there are all these things that now need to be looked into. We have to give it a deep thought into it, and it will happen. It will repeat itself, and we have to be prepared. How are we going to prepare? This is a biggest challenge. So thank you. So that's a few things that I wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sookhareea. I'll quickly carry on to the next question. We just have 10 minutes. So what are the green building solutions to flooding? Tony, you have
yes.
4 minutes, yeah.
I won't be too long. I just want to thank everyone, and thank also our people in government for all the different things we're doing. I know it's not an easy task to resolve some complex challenges like flood or climate change. And I just want to touch on what we can do. President, we have a couple of slides, like 2 or 3 slides, just as a crop for people can see. I think when we look to flooding, what we need to be looking at is the concept called the system. Previously, in the past, what we used to do is when water gets into our property, what we used to do is to just as quick as possible to get rid of the water. And that's how most of our drainage systems have been designed. Basically, you get water as quick as possible away from your site, and it's someone else's problem, like Vincent has rightly said, but we're just displacing the issue. So there is what is called sustainable urban drainage system, which regulates the water quantity, the water quality, as we've seen some of the problem goes to the corals because of the water quality that comes out. And by the way, I won't go through this. We can share these slides afterwards. So what we look at in green building is to actually how do we treat these things? And next slide, please. So the idea with water is we need to slow down the water. And instead of before, in all the developments, all we think about big drains, the bigger, the better, and just get all the water as quick as possible off my property. So it's a wrong thing, but we need to be doing. What we need to be doing is we need to actually slow down the water. We need to actually keep water as long as possible on our site. And this is what we need to do, and we need to spread it. And what we can do also is about the question nature-based solution is to use nature to do the drainage. And that's worked very well. I mean, we consult to some property developers and some big projects. That's what we're looking at, because actually save money instead of using the garden to your drainage system. And how, it creates all these benefits. And more, this is the low impact development system, or more and more in the development, and this is what we call green building practices. So you have bioswales, you have retention ponds, you have all sorts of different ways, like we've seen the pavings, permeable pavings, etc. So this is basically what we need to be looking at when we design something. It's not to just say, let's put some pipes and let's get it all out of our property, but it's more, how we can keep the water and reduce the runoffs. And also we talk about water accumulation. We need to think about that, and we need to calculate things. So the next slide, I'll show you also quickly some of the measures. You have a green roof, so that's a green roof in Black River. So basically, when you have a green roof, the water actually stays under your roof for longer, and it also filters all the different pollutants from the water when it drains it out. And the other one is some permeable sort of paving block, previous slide. And then obviously the normal rainwater collection, because obviously if you collect the rainwater, the water doesn't go anywhere else. I know, because water is cheap, people don't want to spend the money in tanks and etc. But this is one of the strategies. When we look at flooding, and why I'm talking about this, which is a bit away from green building, is the collaboration. We understand the more, it's just a systemic thing, what we're looking at. It's not just one ministry, it's not just one person. We're talking about waste, we're talking about drains, we're talking about all different things. We need to have a data system where we can, put everything in, and which is available to lots of people to crowdsource information, to have sensors, to have all these things. Today we live in, the fourth industrial revolution. There's lots of things which are available to us, and I think for us to be able to collaborate better and to better design, plan, and respond, we need to have a digital twin. We need to have a digital map of Mauritius to be able for us to understand everything, to lay all the information on it for various people to look at and to understand, so we can better mitigate all the risks of losing lives, etc., etc. And I think that's very important. I know that is something that was taken on board. We did for the roadmap for this environment, we did mention this. It was one of the recommendations. But I think this is very critical for anyone to be able to work together and to be able to collaborate and to be able to respond to different challenges. I think that is it for me. Flood risk modeling simulation. If we have data, we have sensors, it's much easier. I myself work in the startup environment. There's lots of satellite imagery, forecasts, all these things are available to us today. And I think we need to tap into this to be able to better our responses. Thank you, that's it for me. We can send you a couple of slides if you need. If you need more information, please get hold of me. Thank you.
Okay, great, wonderful. Thank you, Tony, for that insight. Talking about flooding, trying to slow it down rather than trying to get it all out at once. Okay, so I see a lot of questions in the chat box. I'd like to address these because I know we are already getting on our time here. But we had a last question. Maybe we can just go through some of these questions before we get to the last question here. The questions from the participants. Let me see here. Fabiola, would you like to ask your question?
Hello, do you
Great.
directly? Okay, I will just read the question.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so I think this question is for the NDRMC and Mr. Seewoobaduth. So you mentioned nature-based solution. It is gaining attention globally and locally, but it is important to highlight that it needs to follow some criteria. And for effectiveness, it needs to stem from social, or socio-ecological vulnerability assessment. What is our status regarding such assessment? What is available for people like me or Vincent to build on so that we can really inform nature-based solutions?
So I think the question is about information, about open data and the sharing of some information. So scientific people like yourself can act upon and design those strategies. So I think the question is more about, do we have access to the information, or where all of these different things, the data that you collect, and public have access?
Okay. I can answer to that question partly. Of course, when we are dealing with the issue of flooding, it also relates to climate change. We have in the law, which is called the data sharing. We are working towards that. Just there, there's already the Climate Change Information Center on the website of the Ministry of Environment. Some of the information are already available there. If ever you need more precise information, for example, we had a study which was carried out in 2013. Actually, that was called a disaster risk reduction management framework, something like that, where we carried out a study, a kind of a vulnerability and risk assessment with regard to flooding. You can have some of the data, some of the information which are there. Unfortunately, it is not a wide open public document for some reason, but we can still have access to those kind of information. Now, when this is one thing, there is another study which is just about to be completed, almost completed, financed by the Agence Française de Développement, and whom I acknowledge their contribution in helping in making Mauritius more and more resilient, is about the Mauritius Resilience Strategy. Mr. Sookhareea mentioned about a strategy that was finalized with regard to the disaster risk reduction management, but we also have something now which is with nature-based as part of the as part of the fundamentals of building Mauritius resilience to climate change. This one, at this point in time, we managed to have this study on only 5 pilot areas, unfortunately, but this is something which we intend to scale with further funding coming from, of course, AFD and the Adapt Action, and also Facilité 25 ans. So we already, some of the projects are there. Now, I've seen the comments. Now, we don't say that what are the measures for the assessment. Of course, it is based on the risk assessment. There are measures which are also being devised in terms of specific vulnerabilities where we feel that, where we can go for certain measures. But unfortunately, Mauritius is no longer that virgin island. We're so built up. The concept of, per se, of nature-based entirely, like we try to envision with some few beautiful slides, with the model, is going to be difficult for implementation. So what's remaining actually is whatever development we are having, whether it is hotel development, whether it is new development, any real estate development or smart city, this is where we are trying to factor those kind of elements. Otherwise, let's say going to Ficanflac and have nature-based solution, you can imagine very little we can do only from the lagoon side. But from the land side, it will become really tough at some point in time. We no longer have those land. We no longer have those areas where we can leave for nature to make the work for us. If it is there, it will be mostly in the private side, and whom, for reasons which is not evident, the land is not owned by the state. It's private land. We have to have a longer, still a long way to go, to manage to be able to acquire this kind of land and make them work for us, make for work for nature, and at the end of the day, for the resilience of a particular area.
Great, thank you so much. I have a next question here from Rupesh. Rupesh, would you like to come on and ask your question, please?
Yes, sorry, thanks. Thank you. There was, I think in March, a workshop organized by the Land Drainage Authority, and they were talking about a new drainage master plan, whereby, like the previous intervenants have spoken, we would have a data sharing and updating of intensity curves and things like that. So would anyone maybe know when this is going to be made public?
Well, as maybe I can attempt to that. In terms of the revised intensity curve, well, this is also being done with the Mauritius MMS. So the land drainage master plan, what they are doing, they are using just a revised IDF curve eventually to factor in the assessment. But those IDF curve, of course, once they are finalized, tested, I mean, in terms of validated, they would be, of course, available on sale, I presume, from the MMS. So that should be, could be as soon as possible once it is finalized, I must say.
Yeah,
Okay,
maybe,
Yes, Mr.
yes, I would like also to add, you know, since a couple of years, there has been a lot of studies commissioned and initiated, and by and by we are having the outcome, the recommendation of these technical report carried out by international expert in the field, and not later than last week we had one financed by the UNDP regarding the impact on the mechanization on regarding to flooding. And we have gone, the report is still not yet officialized, but why I am taking the pain of mentioning that, because just to tell you that a lot is happening, but and it will happen in a very organized and structured approach. Referring back to that study, one among the recommendations this study has made is say that regarding the surface runoff coefficient, where there are large extent of agricultural land, this has to be revised, because mechanization is decreasing the absorption coefficient. That is, if there is a certain downpour in mechanized agricultural land, the surface water runoff volume has increased now. And when you see consultants working their EIAs, they're developing their project, they are using a surface runoff coefficient which doesn't match with the reality. But all these are coming up now in terms of flood management. And personally, I feel that we are moving in the right direction in terms of coping capacity of this island to deal with disaster. The rating of the World Risk Report shows that though we are still in the first 100 countries, but we are moving away. Initially, we were the 13th country with the highest disaster risk. Now we are 53rd. Just to tell you that we are moving away from that, and we are taking measures that a country which is realizing that disaster risk reduction, flooding, it's a challenge, and it has to be tackled in a very structured manner in terms of governance, legal, and institutional. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Sookhareea. Jay, you had a question on, would you like to come on and ask the question, please?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. We've been dealing with sort of the symptoms of the ills. I'm not saying that the cause is only that, but one of the major causes is extensive construction, where you've got morcellement all over the island, conversion of a lot of agricultural land, and I'm really appalled when I see what is going on in Mauritius. And I'm just wondering, is government realizing that if we go on in this manner, we will be contributing to the flooding we have experienced over the past years? So will government adopt a policy on land conversions of agricultural lands?
If you allow, I will intervene on this. I will not answer to this very pertinent point raised by our good friend, but just to tell you that this is something that it's a world trend. Development, economic improvement, and all that. You have to have some in a balanced with that. And I'm referring to the Sendai framework, guiding principle. It's based on three. He said that you have to avoid creation of new risk. You have to find a balance. You have to avoid creation of new risk, and you have to reduce existing risk. And also, the three pillars which I mentioned is you have to respond more effectively to disaster. So this is a free area pillars which you have to manage. I repeat, you have to reduce existing risk, avoid creation of new risk, and also if you can't do the avoid creation of new risk, you have to be prepared to respond to that. And Mauritius is a small island. Land is scarce. So all these things are known to the policymakers, to the highest level, but decision to keep on progressing, to keeping up development. So urbanization has to be carried out, but of course we have to do it in such a manner that it will be, in case we are creating new risk, we have to manage it. This is how one of the guiding principles of the Sendai framework. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
A very quick follow-up.
Yes, please go ahead.
Just one thing I wanted to add on that. You know, I mentioned about it earlier. There's already this land drainage impact assessment, which in all major projects, CIAs and so on, you have to have what is called a land drainage impact assessment. Now, the other point is whether government will allow, this is not the question per se. I mean, this is your question. In terms of government issue, all prime land is supposed not to be developed. Of course, this is coming up. There are some demand for it. Since there are demand for those land, this is most probably why, with the abandonment of agricultural land, this is unfortunately what's happening. But other good things is, Tony mentioned it, this is what the guideline that we want to mainstream, you know, in terms of in Europe, in other places, for every plot that you develop, for every area that you develop, you have to create retention basin. Doesn't mean that all the time that you go and modify courses of rivers. This is not actually what is required. So unfortunately, in Mauritius, promoters come, develop, go, and what's happened, the rest, when it becomes the problem, then it becomes state problem. That should not be the case. Personally, what I would be willing to look at in those more settlements, they have to have at least a certain area dedicated where it can retain water, because they're modifying the surface will be modified with the construction. So there must be such surface for which there should be retention pond, and that retention pond should be able to recharge whatever ground recharge it was supposed to do, and kind of control the flow in any nearby waterways or nearby source. It should not become like, once you develop the plot, then it becomes the problem of others, then that issue should be kind of flooding elsewhere. I think this is the mentality change that we need to bring in terms of, and then use of good practices, swales in terms of recharge points, instead of completely kind of concretization, then this is things that most probably will have to mainstream in terms of good practices in the building and land use and other features like that. So I think it's not government per se to have to do it, but I think promoters, developers now will have to rethink that way.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Seewoobaduth. Audrey, you had two questions. I know one was answered, I believe. Audrey, would you like to come on and ask the second question?
Yes, we talk a lot about land conversion and things, but I'm trying right now not to convert land and to build in a sustainable way, respectful, but it's a nightmare. The law is not ready to accept that. There's no law. There's no, so you ask, we ask people to be more respectful, to be able to to build in a way that will not damage the land, that will not create problems. And then there's no law that you can fit. I'm actually going through the process, and I can tell you it's a real nightmare because the district council doesn't have any. You're outside the outline planning, you're outside this, you can't build off-grid because it doesn't exist in the law. You have to convert land, but I don't want to convert. I want to do a farmhouse because historically, it's only been gardien, 30-meter building for a gardien. There is no concept of a farmhouse, but then there's a lot of people who want to do more respectful way of living in the land, and to take care of the land, of those patches that are being abandoned. But if you don't arrange for it and you don't encourage people, then that's where it doesn't work. Tony was talking also about the paving. He was showing that doing the cross, you know, the cross, the kind of paving that allows recharge, then that could be encouraged, that could be subsidized, and discourage the paving itself. But that thing is very expensive. It's as expensive. You see what I mean? There should be very concrete measures and signs from government, making the laws and making sure that the solutions are easier to access, and if possible cheaper. If you take out the tax on that one and you add the tax on the other side, that's not good. So it's a question and a suggestion. The question is, how do we go about getting the laws, the correct laws, to be able to go the way we all know we should go?
Thank you, Audrey. Who would like to answer that? Mrs. Seewoobaduth?
Very quickly, after that, most probably I'd like to apologize, have another meeting, but you know, we're still, like I said, we're still a long way to go. The Climate Change Act provides for measures and a series of action plan and other regulations that need to be brought actually in effect to make you know, whatever areas more resilient, more carbon, with low carbon footprint, and eventually, of course, more resilient to cyclones. So we have this challenge in a small island, but of course, at least we are aiming at, just in very quickly, we are aiming to become carbon neutral well before 2070. So these are plans of work on which government stakeholders would be working soon in the month to come, I must say, in the facility 25. So I'd apologize. I'm sorry, guys, I've been with you. I've another meeting with the chair of the National Youth Environment Council waiting for me since 1300 hours. So I'll have to leave you. If ever, if I have something not kind of responded, you can write to me, or I'll be happy to answer that in later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Seewoobaduth. We appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. We'll be in touch. There is one more question from Mr. Pat. Would you like to ask your question, Mr. Pat? Comment and question?
Yes, good day, everybody. In fact, there are two, but now there is no more any representative of the public authorities. Now, am I wrong? So I will ask the question for the sake of being communicating ideas, because we won't have any answers. My first question is, we heard just now, and it's a good news, that there are quite a few authorities dealing with disaster mitigation, flooding mitigation, etc., etc. At the same time, we heard that those authorities are aware about the impact of urbanization, sprawling over the scarce land availability of the island. And yet we see that many projects, low cost, medium cost, and high cost projects, housing projects, keep on sprawling. So my question is, to add to the list of authorities working on mitigation of disasters, is there any intention to set up an authority to deal with the urban planning and address those issues of low density sprawling, and to have guidelines for low cost housing, for example? Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Sookhareea, would you like to address that question? Would you be?
Yeah, so I will try to address part of it. It's a very complex, complex questions have complex answers. So coming back to the point raised by, it was Mr. Audrey, I'm right? Audrey. So all these suggestions you have mentioned regarding whether there is any institution responsible for having plans, putting into plans for constructions of low-cost housing and all that, and maybe why not green projects, greenhouse, green development projects. So it's the responsibility is a bit scattered, and maybe you amongst institutions. You have the Ministry of Housing, which through the National Development Scheme, which they have recently developed, provide certain guidelines, and also we have at the level of the municipal and district council. They also they are responsible for giving building permits and so on. So there is scope for more work at institutional level to be done, so that there is more convergence in a clearly defined vision of the country, or even in having how do I explain it to you? In having only one, ideally it would have been one organization having that mandate, but unfortunately, as of now, it's not like this. From what I can tell you, from what I have seen, for instance, especially for big projects like requiring EIAs. This is being dealt with at the level of the Ministry of Environment. This is something which is working fine. But others, what about the le citoyen lambda, the normal person, the normal family? So they are not being given the necessary guidance for that. So this is a bit of my personal appreciation of the point raised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Sookhareea. We are actually 20 minutes over the webinar, but I'd just like to finish off with the last question that we had for the panelists. Is just to quickly talk about, maybe Mr. Vincent can start with it, examples of flood control measures that you know of or have heard of. Please, if you can just, just elaborate on a little bit on that. Thank you, Vincent. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. The question was addressed to me?
No, to Mr. Vincent.
Ah, okay, sorry.
We can't hear you. You're muted.
Can you please repeat the question, because I thought also it was addressed to Tony. Yes.
No. Examples of flood control measures, case studies or anything that you've heard of that would, so we could learn from those. Yeah.
Well, actual examples as such, I am not an engineer. I don't go into this kind of project as such. But what comes up from there? I'll just offer a little perspective of what I'm seeing. I'm heard of all the discussion here. I think my personal view, and I'm pretty kind of firm next to it as well, is that the problem seems to be a bit too much emphasis on the after the harm is done story, whereas we should be really looking also that before the harm is done story. Basically, prevention is better than cure. We've heard the idea that Mauritius is very urbanized, etc. There's nothing to do, etc. I don't think so. I think we can restore. I mean, if you look at Puerto Rico, it was extremely deforested and it has changed very much for the much better in that sense. So if you look at Costa Rica, and a lot of places can actually be much greener and much better. So basically, instead of, it's a bit like, you know, I mean, it's a bit of a stark comparison. You know, if you are drink driving and you make an accident and then you get fixed in a very expensive clinic, it costs you a lot, but you get fixed eventually. But would it not be better not to drink drive in the first place? I think it's a bit like that. So we prevent. Prevention, I think, is what we are not looking at all. So I think we can become that experiment that you are talking about. We can become that experiment because the facts of hydrological cycles of nature functioning are there to tell us that if we restore a proper ecosystem functioning, not only we will very much reduce the problem of flooding, but we will have a huge palette of other benefits from this restoration for our biodiversity, for our ecotourism, for our restoring our lagoons and restoring our livelihoods, make it much more sustainable. So I think this is one thing that actually I found a little bit disturbing with Mauritius. We're just too much into resuscitation. Let's not kill it first. Let's actually prevent. Let's shift the balance towards more prevention than cure, because cure costs a lot. I mean, imagine you plant a mangrove on a coastal area. The mangrove can reproduce, but if you put a wall, the wall will never reproduce. You will have to maintain that wall. It will cost much more than mangrove. So, and the mangrove will adjust as sea level rise. The wall will never do that. It's going to be inert. You will have to replace it each time the sea level rises. So I think there's a lot of missed opportunities. And I think, to answer your question, I think Mauritius can create these examples because we are so far down. We have such a huge margin of improvement, and we can be a proof of, you know, of how we can turn around a really terribly damaged environment into something that is worth living for.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vincent, for
that.
That
makes sense?
I know I put you on the spot, but thanks for that. I'd like
That's
to
all right. I improvise.
Yeah, Mr. Sookhareea, if you would have any comments, and then I'll go to Tony, and then we'll close off. Mr. Sookhareea, any comments on that question?
No. We have to ponder upon that. Thank you.
Okay, good. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. For me, not really about some examples. I think there are quite a few examples. I want maybe to stress again on one of the projects of Green Building Council, where we want to actually involve different multi-stakeholder collaboration to try pilot things, exactly what Vincent has said, and to develop our own ways to deal with certain events. And I think that's quite important, to be able to scientifically try things, pilot projects, and report on them so we can scale them nationally. I think this is something that we need to be really looking at if we want to be, either it's, doing sensors for flood risk early warning or whatever. So all these things need to start somewhere. And I think I want to see, for me, more collaboration regarding these pilot projects so we can do a first step to implementing them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any last words from panelists? Last words, last comments. Okay, we are at 1:30. I'm really sorry we passed our time here, but hopefully you all, heard some great insights from our panelists, and we're happy that they were able to join us. And thank you again to them, and thanks very much for joining.